Okay, so what if everything we've been taught about being social is actually totally backward? Seriously, think about it. We always hear that to be happy, you need to be with people, make tons of friends, join groups, and stay connected. But what if all that constant interaction is actually slowly wearing you out mentally? What if it's making you lose touch with who you really are and pulling you away from the most important relationship of all, the one with yourself? It's a tough truth to swallow, but it might just explain why so many folks feel empty even when they're in a room full of people. Empty feeling like you're watching yourself from the outside, totally disconnected from everything going on. Ever felt that? It's kind of weird, right? We spend so much of our lives believing that more people means more connection, more happiness, more feeling fulfilled. Society has just drilled that into us since we were little kids. Be social, make friends, don't be a loner, join the group, stay connected. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody really wants to ask. Why do so many of us feel more lonely in a crowd than when we're by ourselves? I've thought a ton about this over the years. You know, running businesses, meeting thousands of people, going to endless meetings and events. And I've picked up on something that we just don't talk about enough. A lot of what we call socializing isn't actually connecting with folks at all. It's more like a performance. It's just noise. It's filling up space because quiet moments feel awkward, or because we've been taught that if you're alone, something's wrong with you. But what if the real issue isn't that people are lonely? What if the real issue is that they're totally swamped by noise? Let me break down what I mean. Think about your average social interaction. You bump into someone at the grocery store, or you're at a coffee shop, or maybe on a video call with family. The chat usually goes something like this: how are you? Good, you? Good, thanks. Then maybe you talk about the weather, what you ate for dinner, or some show you watched on TV. You know, just small talk. Surface level chatter that doesn't really need much thought and doesn't stick with you later. Now, there's nothing wrong with being polite or friendly, of course, but if that's most of your social life, if you're mostly just filling silence with words, then what are you honestly getting out of it? Here's what I've seen, both in myself and with others. Every interaction, even a super quick one, takes a little something from you. It eats up mental energy. It uses up your emotional battery. You have to change gears, put on a social face, think about what to say, how to answer. If you're coming across okay, even a 5-minute chat has a cost. And when you're doing that all day, every day, for years, those costs really pile up. You don't notice it right away because it's slow, like water smoothing out a rock. But over time, you start to feel scattered, stretched thin, like you've spread yourself across so many little chats that there's nothing solid left inside. And this leads us to a pretty surprising thought. Maybe people aren't lonely, but they're just drowning in noise. I've always been super interested in how our minds work. And one big thing I've learned is that your brain needs space to do its best work. I'm not just talking about physical space, but mental space too. Time to really think, to process stuff, to let ideas sink in and connect. But when you're always hooked up with other people, talking, texting, scrolling social media, going to events, your mind never gets that break. It's always in go mode, just reacting to everything outside of you, jumping from one thing to the next. And when that's your constant state, you lose out on some really important stuff. Clear thinking, deep understanding, and the ability to actually hear your own thoughts. There's this idea I've been kicking around for years that being constantly social actually makes your mind less sharp. Not because being social is bad on its own, but because when you do it without a real reason or purpose, it just turns into mental static. You're filling your time and your head with everyone else's words, their opinions, their expectations, and slowly you lose touch with your own. You stop asking yourself what you actually think, what you truly want, who you really are when no one's watching. Instead, you just become a mirror of the crowd around you. You start thinking about what's okay, what's popular, what gets you a thumbs up. And without even realizing it, you slowly give away who you are inside. Now, I'm not trying to say you should go live in a cave or become a total recluse. That's absolutely not the message here. The real point is to see that there's a huge difference between truly meaningful connection and just mindless interaction. In today's world, we've mixed up those two things so much that it's hard to tell them apart anymore. We act like socializing is always a good thing, something we should constantly be doing more of. But that's kind of like saying eating is good, so we should just eat non-stop, right? The quality matters and why you're doing it matters. Without those, even something that's supposed to be good for you can actually make you feel worse. Let me give you a real-life example. Think about that person who's always swamped, always got people around them, always on their calendar is totally packed. They're in every group chat, they never skip an event. On the outside, they look super successful, social, and involved. But if you really look closely, you might notice something they're wiped out. Not just physically tired, but mentally and emotionally drained. They've lost their spark, you know? They're just going through the motions, but there's no real fire in their eyes. Why? Because they've used up all their energy on the surface stuff and haven't saved anything for their deeper self. And if that's true, it brings up an even bigger question. What happens to your mind when it never gets time to just be by itself? Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. When I talk about being alone, I don't just mean physically by yourself. I mean mentally alone. It's that time when you're not soaking up anyone else's ideas, not answering texts, not checking in on what everyone else is up to. It's just you and your own thoughts. And honestly, for a lot of people, that's totally terrifying. They'll do anything to avoid it. They'll turn on the TV, grab their phone, call someone, anything to fill that quiet space. But why? What are they so scared of? I think what really freaks people out is facing themselves. When you're just with your own thoughts, you can't hide, you can't get sidetracked by someone else's issues or drown out your own uncomfortable feelings with noise. You actually have to deal with whatever's right there. And if you've spent your whole life dodging that, if you've built your whole identity around what other people think of you, then being alone feels like falling into a black hole. Because without that outside approval, without the constant back and forth of social stuff, you might not even know who you are anymore. But here's the kicker, the weird twist. Society actually rewards the opposite. From when we were little kids, we're taught that being social is awesome, and being alone is, well, kind of bad. In school, if a quiet kid sits by themselves at lunch, everyone sees it as a problem. Teachers get worried, parents get worried. Everyone wants to fix them, to get them to open up and join the crowd. But the loud, outgoing kid who's always got friends around, they get praised. They're seen as well-adjusted, confident, successful, and that message just keeps going into adulthood. Networking is a must. Working together is key. Team players get ahead. If you'd rather work alone, if you need your own space, if you're not always available, you get slapped with labels like antisocial, difficult, or weird. Our culture totally celebrates being outgoing and makes being by yourself seem kind of bad. We've made being alone into something shameful, something you have to explain or justify. People even say, oh, I'm an introvert, like they're admitting to some kind of personality flaw. And because of all that pressure, people force themselves into social stuff they really don't want to do. They say yes when they wish they could say no. They show up when they'd much rather chill at home. They pretend to enjoy constant interaction because they're scared of what it'll mean if they don't. And that fear, it leads to something even more dangerous: dependency. So here's what goes down when you spend years training yourself to look for approval and comfort from outside sources. You become totally hooked on them. You can't stand being by yourself because being alone means facing the truth that you don't feel complete on your own. Your self-worth gets all tied up with how many people like you, how many texts you get, how much attention comes your way. And when that attention disappears, even for a second, you freak out, you feel invisible, like you don't matter, like you only exist if someone else is noticing you. This is what I call the dependency trap. And it's one of the sneakiest things about just mindlessly socializing. It doesn't just zap your energy, it actually makes you need it. You get addicted to all the noise because being quiet feels way too uncomfortable. You scroll through social media not because you're genuinely curious, but because you can't stand the stillness. You text people not because you have something important to say, but because you need to know someone's out there. You cram your calendar with plans not because you're excited for them, but because having nothing planned feels like you're failing. And once you're stuck in that loop, breaking free feels almost impossible. Why? Because taking a step back means facing all that discomfort you've been running from. It means sitting with yourself maybe for the first time in years and realizing you have no idea who you are without the crowd around you. But what if you actually do step back, even just for a little while? This is where things really start to change. Because even though it's super tough to break that dependency, and it feels pretty uncomfortable at first, something amazing happens when you do. You start to remember what it feels like to think clearly, to feel like yourself again, to dig up the parts of you that got buried under all that noise. I've seen it happen. I've lived it myself. There have been times in my life when I had to hit pause on all the constant social demands, not because I don't like people, but because I needed to protect something even more important, my ability to think deeply, to create, to stay hooked into my own purpose. And what I found is that the clear thinking you get from being alone isn't empty at all. Nope, it's the total opposite. It's fullness. It's finding yourself again. When you cut back on interactions you don't really need, when you make space between yourself and all those constant social demands, your mind starts to calm down. It's like muddy water that's been left to sit, all the chaos clears and you can finally see right to the bottom. You start noticing things you'd totally forgotten.
Old hobbies that got pushed aside because they didn't fit social calendar, questions you stopped asking because everyone else seemed to have all the answers, dreams and ideas that were just chilling in the background waiting for a moment when you had the mental room to actually pay attention to them. And once you get a taste of that clear thinking, the world seriously starts to look totally different. Let me tell you a story to explain.
Years ago I went through a time where everything just felt like too much. I was juggling multiple businesses, had constant meetings, and people were always pulling at my time and attention. I was surrounded by folks every single day. My teams, investors, reporters, you name it. Everyone wanted something, everyone needed an answer. And on paper, that should have felt awesome, right? I was connected, involved, making stuff happen. But honestly, I just felt all over the place. My thoughts were broken up. I was always reacting to things, but not really creating anything new. So I did something that felt pretty wild back then. I blocked out chunks of time where I was completely off limits. No meetings, no calls, no messages, just time to think. And at first it felt weird, even a little bit uncomfortable. There was this annoying feeling like I should be doing something, talking to someone, fixing some problem. I just sat with that uncomfortable feeling and slowly things started to change. Ideas that had been stuck finally began to flow again. Solutions to problems